be talking about thesis statements, what they are, what they aren't, and how to write them. So I guess first off, we'll just start with the main question: what is a thesis statement? A thesis statement is what your paper is about, but you can't use more than 2 sentences to talk about it. So I guess I can go over like a little bit of a checklist as to what a thesis statement is. So a thesis statement is a 1 or 2 sentence summary of the main points of your essay, and it's going to describe what your body paragraphs are going to be about. So basically, it's going to form the backbone of your paper. Everything that follows is going to relate to that thesis statement in some way. It helps your audience understand what your paper is going to be about, because a paper with no thesis statement is very similar to a movie with no plot. It forms the backbone of everything. It needs to be unified so that every part of the paper relates to each other, because you probably heard teachers talk to you about flow, and that's an important part of the writing. It helps the reader read and have a sense of rhythm as they read to make it easier to read. The only way that can function is if your paper ties back into the thesis statement so everything flows naturally.
Yeah, it's very important your thesis statement follows your paper, but that doesn't mean it's permanent. Your thesis statement paper. Where is paper coming from?
Right.
Sorry. Your thesis statement is not permanent. You can change it. So if you start writing your paper and your paper's about cats are better than dogs, and you go off topic with why cats are better as opposed to dogs being better, you can go back and change your thesis statement. It's not a fragment, so it's not the sky is blue. It's the sky is blue because it's, I don't know, because it's something, because of the colors and this, I don't know.
It needs to be a complete
It
sentence.
needs to be a complete sentence. It doesn't need to be a fragment. It needs to have a complete thought. You need to go with, oh, here's my topic, continue on, here's the rest of it. This is what my paper's going to be about. It should not be opinionated. Don't use words like I think or I believe. It's just a fact. This is what, you use it, you use your opinion, but you say it as a fact. So you go, this paper, not really this paper is about, but this topic is about this.
And
I can't even think of it.
it's easier to think of it as you're not writing about what you think, because obviously if you're writing it down, you do already think it. So stay away from words like that, because it's the term a lot of professors use is called hedging. It makes it sound like you're kind of saying, I think this, so you don't have to go outright and declare something. But be confident with your writing. Don't say I think, just say this is what it is.
Yeah. I like hot dogs. Not really. I hate hot dogs. But say I like this, not without saying I like or I think. It's not just a broad statement. I'm not sure how to explain that.
Yeah, so you want your thesis statement to be somewhat specific, because the broader it is, the harder it's going to be to write the rest of your paper in a way that can tie back to that thesis statement, because it's so broad that so many things can go in there. At the same time, you don't want to get too specific, because if you do, it's going to be really hard to find topics on it. So one thing I always like to, actually I just learned this earlier today, but I find it helpful, is to think of your introductory paragraph like a triangle. Like I drew here, I don't know if you can see that, but it's an upside down triangle, like pointing toward the ground. So your beginning introduction paragraph, the beginning of that paragraph is going to be somewhat broad to kind of bring your reader in. But as you get to the end, toward your thesis statement, toward the apex of the triangle, you're going to want to take the tip of that triangle and make that your thesis statement, because it's going to be more specific as you go down further into your introductory paragraph until you form the apex, which is going to be the point of your paper that you're going to build the rest of your the rest of your paper on. Right. So now that you've kind of got an idea of what a thesis statement is and what a thesis statement isn't, your next question is probably going to be, how do I make my own thesis statement? And so that's where we have our handy dandy board here. So there are 4 main methods of forming a thesis statement. The first one is to think of it like a question. And I don't mean just write a question as your thesis statement. I mean ask yourself a question. So like maybe think about, how how do I achieve more success in my job? Or how do I get my boss to appreciate what I'm doing more? So maybe your question is, do writers have more success in the workplace? Maybe you're thinking about literacy in the workplace. So if that's your question, you can turn that into a statement like, because written communications is important in a lot of professions, great writing skills can lead to greater success. That's just one way of transforming that. You also have if-only statements. So you can think to yourself, man, I wish learning grammar was easier. And then you can think, wait a second, I can turn that into a thesis statement like, the difficulty of learning grammar can lead to students not retaining information and performing poorly, because if they don't understand grammar, how can they function? How can they write?
Another method would be like, I recommend. So if you're saying, I recommend reading this book, like if you have a book report you're doing and you're saying why you recommend this book, it could be like, I recommend reading To Kill a Mockingbird. And you'd go from there, like, To Kill a Mockingbird is a good book to read because it focuses on social values. You could also turn that in, taking stuff about grammar as being fun. Don't stick with the grammar stuff. Grammar is fun. I recommend making grammar fun. Like, it's hard, but it can be fun. And then you would say, to prevent boredom and loss of information, teachers should use humor to make grammar less fun. Lessons fun, not less fun. That wrong. Wow.
And then there's also a final way of constructing a thesis statement, and this one's it's called the relationships method. The reason I kind of like this one because it harkens back to the days of high school science fair projects where they asked you to create a hypothesis, and that was usually like, how does this relate to this? So back then it was like, how does the amount of baking soda affect how much lava is going to come out of my volcano? You can think of it a lot like that. And so an example we have here is how do childhood reading habits affect writing in adults? So you can see how that kind of relates back to the science fair hypotheses. Now, you can't write that as your thesis statement. What you can do is transform that statement into something that is more of a thesis statement. We've actually put that example on the board. So again, the question was, how do childhood reading habits affect writing in adults? Well, we turned that into the thesis statement. Children who read a lot may be better writers in life than those who have trouble reading. And you'll notice that the question, we took a kind of a stance on it. Like this is the point that we're going to try and argue or research or talk about or elaborate on in our paper. So the importance of making it not a question means that you're going to narrow it down into one of those possibilities, and then you're going to write your paper about that possibility. And so that's what you're going to really try to do, is make it as specific as possible while still giving yourself an opportunity to branch off of that and talk about the different ways that things can relate to that thesis.
And definitely making sure that it sticks to your topic. So if your paper is about, going back to the children who are reading, if your paper is about children who read, making children read, then you need to stick with that topic. You don't need to go off into, take your thesis statement and change it in your body paragraph like children shouldn't read or children should watch movies. If you go off topic, you need to go back and revise your thesis statement.
Yeah, and that's something we cannot stress enough, is that if you're writing your paper and you find that you can write better, if that thesis statement is changed, if you can write about a different subject than what you originally put in your thesis statement, you can go back and change that thesis statement. It is not set in stone until you turn that paper in. Make the best paper you possibly can, even if that means revising that beginning sentence. And I guess another thing we could talk about is when do you write your thesis statement? Do you write that at the beginning of the paper? Do you set it down and say, this is what I'm writing about, and then write? Or do you kind of figure out where your argument is and then go back and write the thesis statement later?
What do you do, Chase?
Personally, I'm one of those people who writes it first. That was actually a trick question because either of those options is fine. As long as you make sure your thesis statement is strong, it doesn't matter if you write it first, it doesn't matter if you write it last, it doesn't matter if you decide halfway through and write it right in the middle of your paper. I mean, put it at the beginning, but in the middle of your planning process, you put it down. As long as you have the thesis statement, it doesn't matter when you write it down.
Unless your professor says otherwise. If your professor wants the thesis statement the next day, the next class period, then you might want to go ahead and start thinking of that. personally, I do my thesis statement last. Like, I'll start my introduction and start a thesis and have a general idea, and then just start working on the body paragraphs and go back and revise it. It honestly depends on what's easier for you to do and what your professor wants out of it.
And kind of the last little bit of advice I have about a thesis statement is that in high school, you guys probably heard about the whole like list of 3 things to create a thesis statement. Like, this is like this for this reason because of this, and this.
Yes.
It's a very basic way of creating a thesis statement, and it works for a very basic level paper. But if you want a paper that goes above and beyond the A papers, you're going to want to kind of develop a thesis kind of beyond that and kind of go more in this format. Just because the list thing, it gives you enough to write about, but it really limits you to like a smaller essay, very cookie cutter. It's better essays have better thesis statements.
Welcome to college. You get to write 10 to 15 page papers with 2 sentences thesis, give or take. Not really.
So now we're going to cover topic sentences. And topic sentences are kind of related to thesis statements in that they are essentially a thesis statement on a paragraph by paragraph basis. And so every paragraph you write is going to have a specific topic you're talking about. So if I start a paragraph talking about the impact the media had on the
election.
The election. The media had on the election. That's a little bit broad, but we'll roll with that for now. I don't want to, in the middle of the paragraph, I don't want to switch up and start talking about, about how jelly beans are the greatest candy in the world. It's not true, but I don't want to write that in the middle of the paragraph because it kind of switches the topic. So when you're writing a paragraph, you really want to stick to that topic sentence. And so the topic sentence is also going to relate back to the thesis that you had in your introductory paragraph.
It's the introduction to your paragraph of the first main point of your paper. Like what you believe to be true in your paper. The topic sentence will be the introduction to that paragraph.
And if you remember, we talked about the triangle earlier, about how the tip of the triangle was going to be your thesis statement. Well, the thing that you're going to do now is take that tip of the triangle, make it its own triangle, and make it even more specific in each paragraph. So each little topic sentence is going to be a more specific, more refined version of your thesis statement. So like if we use this example here, children who read a lot better, maybe better writers in life than those who have trouble reading, we can get more specific and pull out a specific study from something like Harvard where they studied this, and they're like, this is actual evidence, actual empirical data that supports this. Well, that's more specific than just a general statement because we have specific statistics. And if that's the case, then that should be the focus of that paragraph, and you've gotten even more specific from the thesis statement. And just as we talked about what I guess we can break this down and say we talked about what a topic sentence, we talked about what thesis statements are and what they aren't. We can do the same thing with a topic sentence. So a topic sentence is going to be the main idea of the paragraph. It's usually going to be the first sentence of the paragraph. It doesn't always have to be, but you want it to keep it around the beginning of the paragraph. It needs to be clear. It needs to have a clear connection between the thesis. It needs to be kind of a hook. It needs to pull somebody in. Because if you guys have done this, if you're reading a paper and it has some boring first sentence, you're not going to read the rest of it. Yeah, anything that says statistical data states, you're probably like brain off. But and it can be also used as a transition, and that's why it's important that it relates to the thesis. Because if it relates to the thesis in a clear way, then the reader is going to easily kind of move into that paragraph than having to kind of have a jarring break between two subjects.
They help keep your paper organized. Like your topic sentences really help to keep your ideas, your thoughts, your facts organized on your paper. If you go off topic, generally it helps to go back and revise your topic sentences as well. If you notice you're writing your paper and you start with one topic and then deviate to another, it's helpful to go back and just let me change this topic sentence so I know it's talking about this. Or if you start writing one topic sentence and notice it's just not in the right area, take it, move it to another paragraph, and start again.
And also, kind of like we said with thesis statements, 1 to 2 sentences. Topic sentences do not need to be long. They do not need to be drawn out. They need to be about a sentence long. They're shorter than the thesis. 2 sentences maximum. Don't make it too vague or too narrow. We talked about making sure that it was talked about earlier about making sure it was specific, but don't make it so specific you can't say anything else. And avoid rhetorical questions or statements, meaning that don't ask a question you can't answer. And that's a general statement for most of writing, in that if you pose a question in a paper, you need to be able to answer that question.
Don't ask a question that already has an obvious answer.
Yeah.
That's kind of
But yeah, I guess that's just kind of the rules of having topic and thesis statements. If you guys have any more questions, feel free to put those in the comments. And again, we are here at the Writing Center in room
347.
Yeah, room 3.
LC 347.
LC 347, right next to the Honors College. If you guys ever need us, feel free to come by.